Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you all. I'm going to take the first step in this journey into the invisible, and the title of my presentation is Global Experiences Towards Achieving Sustainable Groundwater Use. Now, few of us in this webinar would disagree about the amount of attention drawn to our groundwater resources, which has probably never been higher than in this United Nations Year of Groundwater. Often the messaging associated with this attention can be a little bit negative in order to raise awareness about the worsening state of our groundwater resources. Whilst there's no doubt that unsustainable rates of resource use is a very serious problem across the globe, in this presentation, I'd like to just draw some attention towards some of the more positive developments that have been taking place in recent years. Here I will present a number of case studies where concrete steps have been taken towards addressing groundwater overexploitation. These case studies contain a reasonable amount of scientific evidence in order to establish those impacts of those interventions. In this next slide, I present to you a visual representation of what one hopes to achieve through targeted efforts to improve the state of groundwater resources. The schematic highlights the state of groundwater resources before and after intervention of management practices. Note that the graph on the right-hand side shows the groundwater level trends over time. There is a falling trend in levels under the prevailing state in the period prior to intervention, and then in the period after intervention, the trend is rising. It might be useful to think of the interconnected nature of the main elements of the groundwater system that are in place to allow for productive beneficial use. Storage, shown here on the left in blue, is the key feature of groundwater that makes it a strategically important resource. When that storage is threatened due to excess pumping, then we need to look for ways to boost our supply. Extraction of groundwater requires energy and labour. There are many technologies and practices available to enhance energy and labour efficiency. And finally, the use component, shown in the green, shown on the right of the figure, brings in considerations about cropping choices and irrigation methods and ways of building awareness and capacity of water users and their support networks. Now that I've provided some background information, let's take a look at the first case study from the South Asia region. Nowadays, we're observing more and more places in the world where groundwater depletion is happening alongside other water management challenges such as flooding. Think of the Ganges River Basin, for example. There, farmers are having to deepen their tube wells to irrigate rice and sugarcane due to groundwater depletion, whilst at the same time, each monsoon, large monsoon flooding events result in large crop losses. We, by which I mean the International Water Management Institute, my own institute, and other partners decided to see whether we could make progress in reducing the impacts of both of these water challenges through managed aquifer recharge, or simply known as MAR, M-A-R, by redirecting the floodwater to fill underground storage, as shown in the schematic on the left-hand side of this particular slide. We set about piloting this particular type of MAR in a village in the state of Uttar Pradesh in India. In these before and after photos, you can see how the village pond was converted for MAR by constructing 10 infiltration wells into the base of the pond and connecting the pond to an adjacent irrigation canal, which transported floodwaters during the monsoon months. We carried out 3 years of pilot testing at this site. From this, we found that we could recharge somewhere between 30 and 60 million litres each year from that one pond. We tested the surface water quality that we're recharging carefully. Although it was far from pristine in quality, it was no worse than the quality of the ambient groundwater in the area. We developed surface and groundwater models to predict the effects of scaling up of that pilot, recognizing that there were thousands of unused village ponds within the sub-basin where the trial was conducted that could be potentially converted for recharge. Now, drawing your attention to the middle box in the slide, we see that the modelling demonstrated that groundwater depletion could be reversed if the trial was replicated on a sufficiently large scale. Flood risk could also be reduced, as we demonstrated from the surface water modelling. Engagement processes with the community and different levels of government was essential for ensuring that the solution we offered aligned with the needs of those stakeholders. The project has achieved some degree of success in influencing agricultural development policies in the district and more broadly. The next example is from the Madhya Canal project, which offers another way of implementing MAR, Managed Aquifer Recharge, in irrigation command areas. The canals that are not used in the monsoon months have been fitted with water control structures to enhance infiltration through the base of the canals and the surrounding fields. There are a couple of things interesting to share about this particular case study. Firstly, although it was a trial, it was of a very large scale. It extends over an area of about 2,000 square kilometres and takes in several administrative districts. Secondly, its long duration, noting that it was run for a period of about a decade, so that long-term impacts of the interventions were able to be directly observed. The graph shown here through this reoperationalization of the canal shows declining groundwater levels, which were reversed, and rises of around about 6 metres on average were achieved across the area. Apart from the benefits in water availability, energy, agricultural production, and livelihood benefits were also observed, as pointed out in the text within the slide. For example, farmers were able to increase their incomes by 26%. In a recent study, we've assessed the global opportunities for MAR with floodwaters. The findings show that conditions conducive to MAR are present across all inhabited continents. High suitability areas are shown in the two shades of green, light and dark green. They cover areas that are home to around half the world's population and 40% of the agriculturally cultivated areas, cropped areas. These areas take in almost 200 cities with a population of 500,000 people or more. Note, for example, that the North China Plain is amongst the areas highly suited to MAR with floodwaters. The next case comes to us from the Central Highlands of Vietnam. These highlands are a premier coffee growing region, and its location on basaltic terrain means that groundwater is a major water source. Due to the high levels of irrigation, water scarcity has been impacting on coffee production and the livelihoods of smallholder farmers across the region. Areas of highest water scarcity have been identified, as shown by the map with the blue pixels that are found in these water scarce areas are found in all major agricultural areas. IWMI research has found that irrigation rates were significantly higher than the optimal crop water demand. A recently completed SDC Nestle supported project trained around 15,000 coffee growing farmers. The results showed that farmers who had received training on crop water use reduced their water use by around about 30%, as seen by the bar graph in the slide, from 581 millimetres to just over 400 millimetres. For those farmers alone, the savings would translate to around about 9 million cubic metres each year. So the opportunities are immense. Further research is underway to establish crop water requirements more precisely to provide guidance to farmers and agricultural extension agencies. Staying with the Central Highlands, we'll explore the piloting of managed aquifer recharge in that region. So Vietnam has a growing agricultural groundwater economy, but has yet to really make serious progress in MAR beyond desktop studies and modelling. This is work that was conducted from 2017 onwards, where we wanted to test and evaluate MAR at the farm level, making full use of the farmers' existing infrastructure to lower the upfront capital costs for these interventions. We evaluated the trial from technical, social, economic, and environmental perspectives. We found that the performance was variable across the 5 sites that we tested, and those sites are visible on the map on the left of the slide. The perceptions of the farmers was largely in line, in agreement with how well any particular mast system performed. We found that there was endorsement from the government of Vietnam and the global coffee platform in terms of this new technology in Vietnam. Moving on to Lao PDR or Laos, this is the first of 2 case studies on participatory groundwater management, which I'd like to share with you. The focus here is on a small village of around about 2,000 people in Laos. The village is situated on gently sloping margins of the Vientiane Plains, as shown by the hydrogeological cross-section on the top right-hand side of the slide. The entire village water supply comes from the underlying aquifer, sandstone, shallow sandstone aquifers. And with no external support, what's remarkable is that these villages have independently developed a robust strategy to cope with water scarcity. Rules have been put in place for water sharing based on essential needs and placing limits on use of groundwater for cultivation. These rules are used as a way of resolving internal conflicts over water availability. The strong cultural and community cohesion within this multi-ethnic village means that these local arrangements are nowadays followed pretty well. The next example comes from India, and it relates to the AP Farms project. AP Farms stands for the Andhra Pradesh Farmer Managed Groundwater Scheme. It's the largest and longest running participatory groundwater management project that I myself am aware of. It was conducted in the state of Andhra Pradesh in India and run by local NGOs with financial support provided by the Dutch government and then later the FAO. The project operated for a decade and covered over 600 villages in 7 districts. The rationale for the project was that falling groundwater levels had resulted in significant socioeconomic impacts, including failures in tube well drilling, created farmer debt traps, and migration to the cities, and so on and so forth. The project, AP Farms that is, was designed to increase farmer knowledge about groundwater and provide access to scientific information that could bridge the information gap between technical experts and farming communities. Some of the measures applied during AP Farms included crop diversification, improved water efficient irrigation practices, use of water saving devices, efficient pump placement, imposing voluntary drilling bans, and more. Local institutional strengthening was also important. Groundwater management committees were formed with healthy representation from womenfolk in these communities. The monitoring data collected by the project suggested that between the period from 2006 to 2014, the stress on the groundwater resources had been reduced in most cases, as seen from the plots on the top right-hand side of this slide, showing the groundwater draft trends over this period. The success observed from AP Farms and other experiments and case studies across India have had a major impact on government public policy. In 2019, the government of India, together with the support from the World Bank, started the so-called Atal Jal program to bring participatory groundwater management to scale across 7 drought-affected hard rock states across Western India, which are shown on the top right of the slide. The total investment into Atal Jal is estimated to be around about $1 billion US, and many of the elements of AP Farms are embedded within the program. Now I'd like to consider the urban environment. This case is from the Asian megacity of Bangkok, where the average elevation of the city is just 1.5 meters above mean sea level. With rising sea levels on one side of the city and incoming floodwaters on the other during the monsoon months, the added problem of land subsidence observed in the 1970s and early 1980s was just one problem too many that required urgent attention. The key aquifers for control were the so-called 2nd, 3rd, and 4th aquifers beneath the city, found at depths of 100 to 250 meters below ground level. The The initial approach used, that is from the late 1980s through to the early 1990s, was to close public water supply wells and replace them with distributed surface water supplies. Now, this brought about a massive spike in drilling for domestic, commercial, and industrial use in response to the high charges associated with the pipe water. So the desired effect was not being achieved. In response, the Groundwater Act of 1977 was invoked, and new legislation passed by government to take more serious action. This included defining critical areas where well drilling would be banned, closing wells where pipe water supplies were present, licensing wells according to metering or estimation. In fact, licenses are needed now for wells that are deeper than 15 meters deep. Public awareness campaigning was also undertaken. The groundwater fees are as high as $0.21 per cubic meter of water pumped, and the approaches applied were fine-tuned over time by the groundwater authorities. Dedicated staff were assigned to licensing and site inspection. Loopholes in the licensing systems were independently checked and fixed over time. The groundwater resource recovery efficiency is estimated to be around about 80% or more. As a result of these regulatory and economic measures, rates of subsidence were reduced throughout the city from a peak of around about 10 centimetres per year down to about 3 centimetres per year, as you see from the plot on the bottom right-hand side of the graph. Case study 5 comes from the city of Perth, which is Australia's 4th biggest city. The most important water resource in Perth is the Gnangara groundwater system, shown by the map on the bottom right-hand side of the slide. Climate change is now well documented to have reduced Perth's rainfall by around about 15%, and runoff has declined by significantly more than that. Major reductions in groundwater storage have been observed, as you can see from the plot in this slide. As a result, the health of groundwater-dependent wetlands and their biodiversity is suffering, as seen from the photos on the bottom left, and groundwater quality is reducing in some areas. Urgent attention was required to manage the groundwater system sustainably and adapt to climate change. The groundwater allocation plan for the Gnangara system was prepared and updated where needed. The plan is underpinned by extensive groundwater modelling and analysis to estimate the sustainable groundwater balance. Targets for water reduction ranging from 10 to 30% was estimated across different water user groups. The regulator, the so-called Department of Water and Environment, has been using regulatory measures to conserve groundwater. They include limiting private licenses to 10 years, with renewal entitlements subject to change thereafter, reducing groundwater use for public supply, capping growth through licensing of self-supply systems, restricting daytime sprinkler use in summer, and total bans on groundwater use for outdoor gardens in the winter months, introducing MAR with highly treated wastewater. The graph seems to show that the measures implemented are having an effect, as groundwater levels have stabilised in most recent years. And finally, onto solar pumping. India and South Asia more broadly are investing very heavily in the use of solar technologies for irrigation. There are a few key reasons for that. Firstly, in order to meet India's commitments to the Paris Agreement to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Secondly, to reduce pressure on electricity providers who are incurring heavy losses by providing highly subsidised power to the agricultural sector. And third, to improve farmer livelihoods by reducing input costs for farmers. To date, more than 200,000 solar irrigation pumps have been installed across India with the help of government and other actors. However, there are genuine fears that providing farmers with access to pumps that can operate whenever the sun shines at effectively a zero marginal cost will exacerbate the already large problems of groundwater depletion evident across India. An SDC-supported project is underway right across South Asia to address this and other barriers to sustainable, inclusive expansion of solar irrigation. The plots at the bottom of this slide are some emerging results from the Indian field sites in the state of Gujarat. One site is situated on basaltic terrain, another on alluvial terrain. They show that the rates of groundwater use between solarized and non-solarized farmers may not be substantially different. However, this is still a very preliminary result. Work in this area is continuing in the coming years. So finally, a few takeaway points from this presentation. Firstly, there are, I think, a range of solutions that have been demonstrated in addressing groundwater challenges, both in rural and urban settings. And they've been demonstrated right across the Asia-Pacific region and potentially applicable to other regions as well. Secondly, solutions require tailored approaches that build on good evidence, namely data, technical and institutional capacity, community awareness, and political willingness to be successful. Third message is that the restoration of groundwater balances can be achieved through either demand or supply-based management, but combined approaches are probably best. And finally, applying a nexus approach that harmonizes water policies with agricultural policies and energy policies helps to facilitate some positive outcomes. So finally, a big thank you to STC and other organisers of this webinar for the opportunity to contribute to this important event. And I'm happy to take questions and comments in the remaining time.